Alma Weston sat at her kitchen table, the afternoon light cutting in pale slats through the blinds, landing across the pile of envelopes like accusing fingers. The stack was thick. Bank statements, past due notices, and glossy letters with bold red stamps. She turned them over slowly, as if maybe, just maybe, one of them would reveal something kinder on the back. But they all said the same thing: debt. The ballpoint pen in her hand trembled as she traced the ink already scrawled across one of the papers. Her signature, Alma C. Weston. Neat, looping, still careful after all these years. It was the same signature she had placed at the bottom of every form Daniel had ever put in front of her. She remembered the first time. He was 24, fresh out of college, his cheeks still round with youth and hope. Mum, I just need you to co-sign. The bank says I'll get approved with your credit. I swear. I'll handle every payment. She had smiled then, proud of his ambition. Her late husband Charles had always said their boy was destined for something big. Alma had believed it too. Signing had felt like an act of love, like giving him wings. Now, nearly 5 decades later, those wings had torn her apart. She pushed the latest letter away, her hand brushing crumbs from the table. Her kitchen was small, worn from years of use, the linoleum cracked, the cabinets painted over so many times that the wood grain had disappeared. Yet Alma had always taken comfort here. This was the house Charles had bought in 1978, the place where she had raised Daniel, where they had celebrated birthdays, Christmases, where the walls still echoed with his boyhood laughter. But love had been replaced with requests, always requests. Every milestone in Daniel's adult life had come with a form shoved into her hands. A car loan at 28, a credit card at 30, a mortgage refinance at 35, a second business loan at 42. Now at 48, a can't-miss scheme for a delivery company app. Each time Alma's signature had been the key that unlocked doors for him, and shackles for her. The last one was the heaviest, $60,000. She could still hear Daniel's words, slick with desperation and charm. It's foolproof, Mom. People order food, we deliver faster than anyone else. We just need capital to get started. Trust me, this is it. This is the one that changes everything. She had hesitated, but Daniel had clasped her hands, his eyes wide and watery. You're all I've got, Mom. You know Dad would have believed in me. And that was the blade he always used. Charles. The memory of her husband was the lever to pry open her doubt. She had signed. Now the letter in her hand said otherwise. Notice of default. Amount due, $60,000 plus fees. The words blurred. Alma pressed the paper flat, her chest aching. She had a modest pension, a bit of social security, and savings that had already been chipped away by years of helping Daniel. But this would devour what little remained. Her gaze drifted to the framed photograph above the table. Charles, smiling in his Sunday suit, arm wrapped around her shoulders, his eyes forever steady. She whispered to it, as she often did when the loneliness pressed too hard. Charlie, what have I done? Our boy, he's bleeding me dry and I can't say no. I never could. The house creaked softly, settling as though listening. Outside, children played in the fading light. their voices sharp with life. Alma closed her eyes. The house felt both full of ghosts and empty of love. A knock at the door startled her. She wiped her eyes quickly, folded the letter, and set it beneath the others. When she opened the door, Daniel stood there. He looked older than his years, hair thinning, shirt wrinkled, the smell of smoke clinging to him. But his grin was still boyish, the same grin that once melted her resolve. "Mom," he said brightly, stepping inside without waiting. "You got the notice, huh? Don't worry, I'm working on something. Just a setback." Alma froze in the doorway, her hands twisted in her apron. "Daniel," she said softly, "they're saying foreclosure." On the house, he waved it off, plopping into her worn armchair like he owned it. "Relax, Mom. You worry too much. I've got a buddy who knows investors. Big guys. They'll bail me out and you won't even have to lift a finger." Alma studied him, her heart cracking. He still believed she was his safety net. She was 72 years old, the bones in her hands stiff with arthritis, her nights spent calculating how long she could stretch her groceries, and still he looked at her as if she were a bank teller with an endless drawer of cash. Her lips parted, but no words came. She wanted to tell him no. She wanted to scream. Instead, she sank into the kitchen chair, staring at her signature, the weight of it pressed down harder than ever. And in that moment, Alma Weston realized she was drowning, because she had never learned to stop saying yes. The letter arrived on a Wednesday morning, tucked inside a plain white envelope that looked like any other piece of mail. Alma had almost ignored it, thinking it was another circular, maybe a coupon she couldn't afford to use. But when she slit the top with her butter knife and slid the paper free, her breath caught. Final notice. Eviction. Proceedings to begin. The words screamed at her, black and merciless. She sank into the kitchen chair, the old wood groaning beneath her, as if echoing her despair. For a moment, she simply stared, her vision fogging, her hands trembling so hard she nearly tore the paper in two. The house had always been more than walls. It was her life, her history stitched into every corner. She could still see Charles kneeling by the fireplace, coaxing kindling into flame during their first winter here. She could hear the patter of Daniel's little feet running down the hallway, the sharp echo of his laughter as he played hide and seek with his father. The lilacs Charles planted in the yard still bloomed faithfully every spring, even though he had been gone 12 years. Now strangers would come and take it. Her home would become just another address for someone else. Her memories wiped away under new paint and fresh curtains. She pressed the paper against her chest and whispered, "I can't lose you too, Charlie. Not the house. Not this." The phone rang. Its shrill sound cut through her thoughts, making her flinch. She picked up, hoping absurdly that it might be a mistake, that someone from the bank would tell her there'd been an error. It was Daniel. "Mum," his voice burst through, cheerful, too quick. "Listen, I know you got something from the bank. Don't panic, okay? It's just part of the process. They send scary letters, that's all." Alma's fingers tightened around the receiver. Her voice came out fragile, a whisper. "Daniel, they're evicting me. This is real." He sighed as though she were the one making life difficult. "Mom, You're overreacting. I told you, I've got people working on this. I just need a little more time. Maybe if you could, I don't know, pull together a few thousand to keep them off our backs until the deal closes. Her heart lurched. Daniel, I don't have it. I don't have anything left. You've taken everything. Silence hummed on the line for a moment. Then his tone sharpened. Don't say it like that. I didn't take. You helped, like a good mother should. Dad would have wanted you to back me up. That sentence was the knife, sharp and familiar. Always Charles, always dragging his father's memory into the conversation like a shield. Alma bit her lip hard, tasting blood, but she didn't argue. Mom, Daniel pressed, softer now, almost coaxing. You don't want to end up on the street. Just trust me. I'll fix this. You've trusted me before, right? She closed her eyes. The truth pressed against her like a heavy stone. Every time she had trusted him, she had lost a little more. A savings account, a retirement cushion, now her home. I need to go, she whispered, and hung up before he could answer. The receiver clattered against its base. Alma sat frozen, her hands pressed to her lap. Her chest hurt. For years she had swallowed disappointment, dressed it as patience, called it love, but something inside her cracked that morning. She stood slowly and crossed to the hallway mirror. Her reflection startled her. The woman staring back wasn't the gentle, yielding mother she remembered. This woman had deep lines carved into her face, eyes dark with weariness and grief. She looked like someone who had been hollowed out, and for the first time in her 72 years, Alma felt anger. Not the fleeting frustration she'd always swallowed down, but a molten, rising anger that burned through her fear. Her son had taken her kindness and turned it into currency. He had made her love a ledger, her devotion a debt. She lifted the eviction notice again, her hand steadier now. No more, she said softly, her voice shaking but firm. I can't keep saving him if it means losing myself. The words filled the air, fragile but alive, as if the house itself had been waiting years to hear them. For the rest of the day, Alma moved like a sleepwalker, sorting through papers, stacking bills, gathering what little she had left in her checking account. She avoided the phone when it rang, Daniel's number flashing again and again. That night, unable to sleep, she climbed the narrow attic steps to find an old blanket. Instead, in the far corner beneath a collapsed box of Christmas decorations, she saw it, a chest, worn, wooden, the edges scarred with time. Alma paused, heart thumping. It was Charles's. She hadn't touched it since the funeral. She wiped dust from the lid with trembling fingers. For a moment she simply stared, her breath caught in her throat. Then slowly she knelt and opened it. Inside were neatly stacked journals, each one bound in Charles's familiar, blocky handwriting. Numbers filled the first page she turned to, precise columns and notes in the margins. Not bills, not lists, plans, investment plans. Alma sat back on her heels, the eviction notice still folded in her apron pocket, her pulse racing. For the first time in months, maybe years, something sparked inside her. Not hope, not yet, but possibility, and it terrified her. The attic smelled of cedar and dust, the kind of dry air that clung to the lungs and left a faint sweetness on the tongue. Alma sat cross-legged on the rough boards, her knees protesting, the dim bulb above flickering with each passing breeze that rattled the old roof. The journals sat in her lap, stacked in a careful tower, as if her late husband had placed them there for her to find when the time was right. Their covers were plain brown leather, softened from years of handling, the corners rounded, the stitching faintly frayed. Charles had always been meticulous, but not fussy, his handwriting straight as a ruler, his numbers written with a confidence Alma had always admired, but never questioned. She traced her fingers over his name inside the front cover of the first one, Charles E. Weston, 1989. The neatness of it brought tears to her eyes. She had not seen his handwriting in years. Not since those last days in the hospital when his signature trembled on consent forms. But here it was, bold and alive, as though he were sitting across from her now. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to focus. She flipped to the first page, columns of numbers, dates, company names scribbled in the margins. At first it made little sense, a blur of symbols and abbreviations. Alma frowned, turning page after page. Each was filled with calculations, arrows, notes. Buy low during dip, sell after third quarter. Long-term stability, utilities, railroads, consumer staples. Her head spun. Investments. Charles had never mentioned stocks. He'd worked at the post office for 30 years, steady and content. At least that's what she thought. As she read further, she saw more than numbers, notes about risk, questions to himself, even small doodles, little arrows, stars beside companies that interested him. The journals weren't just records, they were lessons. And Alma realized something astonishing. Her husband had been studying, experimenting on paper, dreaming of building wealth. "Charlie," she whispered, her voice breaking, "you never told me." She thought back to their late nights together, Charles sitting with a ledger on his lap while she knitted beside him. She had assumed he was balancing bills, counting paychecks against groceries, planning for Christmas. She never asked, and he never shared. Perhaps he had feared disappointment if his ideas failed. Perhaps he wanted to spare her the worry. Now here was the truth, decades later, waiting for her when she needed it most. Alma turned another page, this one dated just a year before he died. His handwriting had grown a little shakier, but his notes were clear. "If I don't get the chance, maybe Alma could." Her breath caught, the words blurred with tears. She pressed her hand to her mouth, shaking. He had thought of her. He had written her name. For a long while Alma sat in the silence of the attic, the journals warm against her lap. Fear clawed at her chest. She had never so much as bought a stock in her life. At 72 she barely knew how to use her cell phone without Skylar's. No, not Skylar, she corrected herself bitterly, without her granddaughter's mocking laughter. Could she really learn this? Could she take Charles's unfinished dream and make it into something more? Her mind snapped back to the eviction notice folded in her apron pocket. $60,000, the impossible mountain. What did she have to lose? She gathered the journals carefully, carrying them downstairs as though they were sacred texts. On the kitchen table, beneath the dim glow of the overhead lamp, She spread them out in a neat row. She made herself a pot of tea, her hands steady despite the storm inside her. For hours Alma read. She read about diversification, about patience, about the power of reinvesting. She underlined phrases Charles had circled. She jotted notes in the margins, her pen scratching like the sound of her own heartbeat. Some things were beyond her comprehension, but others began to click into place, and with each page she felt Charles's presence, as though he were guiding her, steadying her trembling hand the way he had once steadied Daniel's when teaching him to ride a bike. Near midnight she closed the final journal of the night, exhaustion heavy in her bones. The house creaked around her. The eviction notice still sat in the pile of unopened mail, but now for the first time in years, Alma didn't feel only fear. She felt a spark, a small one, fragile as the flame of a match in the wind, but alive. She whispered into the quiet kitchen, "Maybe I can, Charlie, maybe I can." And as she turned out the light, Alma Weston didn't know that this spark, born of desperation and a chest of forgotten journals, would grow into the fire that would change everything. The next morning Alma awoke with a heaviness in her chest that no tea or sunlight could wash away. The eviction notice still lay on the kitchen counter, accusing her with its bold black lettering, but beside it now rested something else. 3 of Charles's journals, stacked neatly as if waiting for her. She touched them before pouring her coffee, her fingertips grazing the leather. They felt alive, humming with a strange power. For years Alma had believed learning ended with her high school diploma, with the secretarial job she had held until Daniel was born. Since then her education had been of a different sort, raising a son, stretching paychecks, surviving loss, numbers, investments, markets. These were words for other people, younger people, smarter people, yet she remembered Charles's neat handwriting, his quiet confidence. If I don't get the chance, maybe Alma could. That single line had lodged itself in her chest, more powerful than any eviction threat. Maybe Alma could, she whispered, repeating it like a prayer. That afternoon Alma cleared the kitchen table. She stacked her bills to one side, pushed away the unopened mail, and spread out the journals, a lined notebook, and the reading glasses that pinched her nose. The table became her classroom, the journals, her textbooks. At first it was like staring into a foreign language. Acronyms leapt from the pages. P/E ratios, ETFS, dividends, compounding returns. She scribbled them in her notebook with clumsy, uneven letters. Some words she copied without knowing what they meant, just to feel them take shape under her pen. Frustration rose quickly. More than once she pushed the journals away, muttering, "I'm too old for this. This is nonsense. What am I doing?" But then she would glance at Charles's photo on the wall. His eyes seemed to follow her, gentle and patient. "You can, Alma." So she pressed on. She began visiting the library, clutching Charles's journals in her bag. The young librarian, a girl with a nose ring and purple hair, raised an eyebrow when Alma asked for books on investing. "For yourself?" she asked, surprise softening her tone. "Yes," Alma said, her voice firmer than she expected. The librarian smiled. "Good. Most people your age are afraid of this stuff." Let me show you some beginner guides. At night, Alma sat at the kitchen table long after the neighborhood lights had gone dark, reading by the yellow glow of her lamp. She learned about compound interest, about how small, steady investments could grow over time. She compared her notes with Charles's scribbles, recognizing that much of what he had written decades ago was still true. She borrowed books, printed articles from the library computers, even jotted down terms she overheard on the evening news. Her notebook filled with underlined words, arrows and reminders. Don't panic during downturns. Think long term. Risk is not the same as recklessness. Sometimes the weight of it overwhelmed her. She would drop her head into her hands, whispering, "I can't, Charlie. I'm too late, too old." But then she would remember the eviction notice. She would picture Daniel's careless grin as he waved away her fears, and she would sit up straighter, her pen scratching against paper again. Weeks passed like this, slow, grueling, filled with both failure and tiny triumphs. Alma made mistakes in her calculations, crossed them out, tried again. She practiced on paper, following Charles's examples, pretending she had bought stocks decades ago when he had suggested them. She tracked what those investments would be worth today, her heart pounding when she realized how right he had been. Her first real attempt came one Tuesday morning. She sat at the computer in the library, palms sweating, as she opened a brokerage account with the small savings she still had left, $1,200, every penny she could spare without missing rent. She hovered over the keyboard, fear clawing at her throat. "What if I lose it all?" she whispered, but another voice, quiet, steady, rose within her. "What if you don't?" With a breath, Alma clicked, "Submit." The screen refreshed. Her balance appeared, real and waiting. Her chest heaved, both terrified and exhilarated. She walked home through the autumn streets, the air crisp against her cheeks, feeling both lighter and heavier at once. That night, she wrote in her notebook, "Today I began, for the first time since Charles died, since Daniel's betrayals had hollowed her out." Alma felt something bloom inside her. Not just hope, power. Alma had never been so aware of numbers in her life. Not when she balanced grocery lists on a meager budget. Not when she counted pennies in her coin jar for Daniel's school trips. Not even when she watched her bank account bleed dry after co-signing loan after loan. But now numbers danced across her library computer screen like fireflies, flickering, shifting, alive. She had spent weeks reading Charles's journals, studying beginner guides, and filling pages of her notebook with notes and half-erased calculations. But it was different when her own money was on the line. Her $1,200 wasn't much, yet it was everything she had. Her hand trembled as she hovered over the search bar of the brokerage site. She whispered the ticker symbols she'd written down, repeating them like prayers. JNJ, KO, VOO. Her first thought was fear. What if I choose wrong? What if I throw this away like Daniel did with every loan? But then she reminded herself, this wasn't Daniel's reckless scheme. This was hers. This was careful. She scrolled through charts and company names, reading aloud like a student. Johnson & Johnson dividends, Coca-Cola, long history, Vanguard Index Fund, low cost, diversified. Her eyes landed on the last one. Charles had mentioned it over and over in his journals. If I could do just one thing, I'd put steady money into a fund like this. No gambling, just time. Her pulse quickened. She typed in the symbol, stared at the screen, and clicked buy. The system asked her how many shares. Her mouth went dry. She entered the number 3. The confirmation button glowed. Alma closed her eyes, pressed her palm to her chest and whispered, "Charles, walk with me." Click. Done. Her balance shifted. She was officially an investor. For a long time, Alma simply sat there, staring at the words. It felt impossible that something so ordinary, numbers on a screen, could change her so completely inside. She walked home through the chilly autumn air, her scarf pulled tight, her feet almost skipping, though she scolded herself for the foolishness. "Don't get carried away, Alma. It's only 3 shares." Yet the thought made her smile. 3 shares, hers. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm tea, refreshing her account over and over. Sometimes the numbers dipped, sometimes they rose. Each tick felt like a heartbeat, each change like a storm. At midnight, she whispered to herself, "Is this what Daniel felt?" That rush. But no, it wasn't the same. Daniel had gambled with debts, with other people's money, always chasing a quick miracle. Alma wasn't chasing anything. She was planting. The next morning, she nearly spilled her coffee when she saw her balance had gone up by $14 overnight. $14. It was the smallest of sums, laughable compared to the thousands she had lost through Daniel. But Alma covered her mouth with both hands and began to laugh, loud, shaking laughter that startled even her. It wasn't about the $14, it was proof that she could do this. She spent the following weeks testing herself with tiny moves, reading quarterly reports with her glasses slipping down her nose, watching dividend payments arrive in her account. Like small gifts, each dollar earned felt like a whisper from Charles, encouraging her forward. Still there were bad days, days when her account balance dipped, when red numbers flashed like alarms. Those days, panic clawed at her. "Sell, sell before you lose it all," the frightened voice inside her screamed. But then she would remember her notebook, Charles's calm handwriting, and the words she had underlined 3 times. "Don't panic during downturns. Think long term." So Alma held, and every time she did, she grew a little stronger. Winter came slowly, wrapping the city in grey skies and bare trees. For Alma, the season was no longer just a reminder of heating bills and isolation. It became a season of study. Each morning, she woke early, made a pot of oatmeal, and sat at her kitchen table with Charles's journals, her notebook, and the glow of her laptop. Where once her hands had scrubbed dishes or folded linens, they now traced stock tickers and dividend charts. Her handwriting filled page after page, neat and careful, as though she were back in school. At 72, Alma was a student again. The changes came in quiet ripples. Her first dividend check was a mere $2.47, yet she held the slip in her hand as though it were gold. She taped it to her fridge, right next to a faded photo of Charles. By February, her $1,200 investment had grown by $96. Not much, but when she added it to her savings, Alma felt something she hadn't in years. Control. She tightened her budget with the discipline she once reserved for raising Daniel. No more unnecessary spending, no favors to her son when he asked for just $20 for gas. She cooked beans and rice in bulk, patched her clothes instead of buying new, and funneled every spare dollar into her new account. Little steps, she whispered as she clicked buy on another share of Coca-Cola. Little steps become miles. At the library, the staff began to notice her. Back again, Miss Alma, said Corinne, the young librarian with warm eyes. Alma smiled, adjusting her scarf. Can't let these brains rust. Charles wouldn't forgive me. Soon, Corinne would save articles for her, slipping them across the desk. I thought you might like this one on dividend investing. Simple and clear. The kindness made Alma's throat tighten. For years she had been invisible at family dinners, overlooked at birthdays, dismissed as a nuisance. Now here she was, valued by strangers for her determination. March brought the first test of her resolve. Markets dipped. Headlines screamed of uncertainty. Red numbers flooded her screen, and her account balance shrank overnight by nearly $200. Alma gripped her mouse, panic rising. Sell before it all vanishes, the fearful voice hissed. She stared at Charles's journal, his words steady as ever. If you don't believe in the storm, you'll never see the sun. Hold steady, Alma. With a deep breath, she closed her laptop. She brewed tea. She read her psalms. She waited. By April, the market bounced back, and her account grew higher than before. For the first time in years, Alma trusted herself. By summer, Alma's savings had reached $7,000. She nearly wept when she realized it. Not because it was much compared to what she had lost to Daniel's endless demands, but because it was hers, untouched, untainted, built by her own hands and choices. She started walking differently, her steps lighter, her back straighter. Neighbors noticed. Mrs. Delgado from 2B called out one morning, "Alma, you look 10 years younger. What's your secret?" Alma chuckled, clutching her grocery tote. "Discipline and beans." Lots of beans, but inside she knew the truth. It wasn't beans, it was freedom. One day as she balanced her checkbook, the phone rang. "Mom," Daniel's voice said, strained, "I need help." The business fell through again, and the landlord's threatening eviction. Alma's hand shook. For decades her instinct was always the same. Save him, fix it, rescue him. But this time she inhaled slowly and said, "Daniel, I'm sorry. I can't." Silence, then a sharp exhale. "Can't or won't? You've always got something tucked away. You're my mother." Alma closed her eyes. "I gave until it broke me. I won't do it anymore." The line went dead. Alma set the phone down and stared at her trembling hands. Her chest hurt with grief, but also relief. For the first time she had chosen herself. That night she lit a candle by Charles's photo and whispered, "I think I'm learning what you wanted me to know." The flame flickered, steady and sure. Alma smiled softly, realizing she had crossed an invisible threshold. She was no longer a desperate woman clawing out of ruin. She was a woman rebuilding, slowly, surely, stone by stone, and with each step she was less afraid of what lay ahead. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and dust, the kind of scent that clung to history and judgment. Alma sat on the stiff bench, hands folded tightly in her lap, heart hammering as though she were the one on trial. She had dressed simply, grey slacks, a navy cardigan, nothing that would draw attention. To everyone else in the room, she was just another aging woman waiting for the bus. No one needed to know that the LLC printed neatly on her documents, Riverside Holdings, LLC, was her secret shield, the same shield that would allow her to walk into this auction and, God willing, walk out the owner of her own foreclosed home. The auctioneer, a brisk man in a pinstripe suit, tapped his gavel against the podium. Lot 12, single-family residence, Maple Avenue, 2 stories, 3 bedrooms, starting bid, $80,000. Alma's stomach clenched. Maple Avenue, her house, her home. Her mind flickered with images. The kitchen where Charles had kissed her good night. The creaky stairs Daniel once thundered down on Christmas mornings. The garden where she planted lilies every spring. Memories layered one on top of the other until her vision blurred. She clenched her jaw. This isn't just walls and windows. This is my life, my dignity, my proof that I can rise again. The first bid came quickly. 80,000, a man in the front row said, his voice casual, like he was buying an extra tool for his shed. 90, another voice countered. Alma forced her hand to stay still. Timing mattered. 100, said a woman with sharp heels and sharper eyes. The numbers climbed. Alma's palms grew damp. Her LLC funds, everything she had built, scraped and saved, gave her a ceiling. She couldn't climb past $147,000 without risking collapse. 110, 120, 125. Alma's throat tightened. If she hesitated too long, she'd lose. If she leapt too soon, she'd burn out before the end. The auctioneer's gavel hovered. 125, going once. Alma raised her bidder card. 130. The room turned, eyes briefly flicking toward the grey-haired woman with steady hands. She kept her face unreadable, her heart thundering against her ribs. The woman with sharp heels smirked and fired back. 135. Alma swallowed. Hold the line. Trust yourself. 140, she said, her voice clear, firmer than she expected. The smirk faltered. The other bidders hesitated. The room quieted. The auctioneer's gavel hovered again. 140, going once, going twice. Alma's hands trembled. Just a few more seconds. Sold. The gavel cracked against the block. The words seemed to echo inside her chest, louder than the chatter that resumed around her. Sold to Riverside Holdings, LLC, to Alma. The paperwork was a blur of signatures and stamped documents. She signed each page with careful strokes, disguising her shaking hand. When the clerk handed her the final copy, Alma clutched it like a sacred relic. Stepping out into the cold afternoon, she pressed the folder to her chest. The courthouse steps stretched before her like a cathedral aisle, every footstep echoing with a truth she could barely hold inside. She had bought back her own house, not with charity, not with Daniel's pleas or Tanisha's manipulation, not even with Charles's steady hand guiding her directly, but with her own will, her own discipline, her own courage. That evening, Alma stood outside the house on Maple Avenue. The paint was chipped, the garden overgrown, the shutters dangling loose, but to her it was beautiful. Her key, the old one she had kept tucked away even after eviction, didn't fit anymore. She laughed softly to herself. Of course, new locks, new chapter. She ran her hand across the doorframe, whispering, "I'm home." For a long moment, Alma simply stood there, breathing in the twilight air. She thought of the years of humiliation, the grape juice stains of cruelty, the endless loans, the laughter at her expense. All of it had led here, to this door, where she no longer begged for respect. She had reclaimed it, not just the house, but herself. But as she turned to leave, headlights swung across the driveway. A car pulled up, Daniel's. Alma froze, her breath catching. He stepped out, shoulders hunched, face drawn with fatigue. "Mom," his voice cracked, "I heard the house got sold. Please tell me it wasn't you. Please say I can come home." Alma's fingers tightened on the folder in her arms. The night hummed with silence, the house looming between them like a verdict. For the first time in her life, Alma had the power. The key wasn't in the lock yet. It was in her hand. Would she open the door or close it for good? She didn't answer. Not yet. The night air clung damp against Alma's skin as Daniel stood in the driveway, his old Honda wheezing like a tired beast behind him. For a moment, neither spoke. The house loomed between them, silent, waiting. Then headlights swung again. Another car. Out stepped Tanisha, wrapped in a fur-trimmed coat that looked too new for their supposed struggles. Her heels clicked on the cracked pavement as she approached. "Daniel," she snapped, "why are you just standing there? Who bought it? Who do we need to talk to?" Daniel turned, his voice low. "It was Mom." Tanisha blinked, then let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "No, don't be ridiculous." She looked past him, her eyes narrowing at Alma, who stood calm with the folder against her chest. "Tell me he's lying." Alma's voice was quiet but steady. "He's not lying." I bought it back. Through my own company she lifted the folder slightly, as if presenting evidence. "This house is mine again." Tanisha's mouth fell open, then curled into a sneer. "Yours? With what money? You've always been broke, Alma. You can't even keep up with your electric bill half the time." Alma's jaw tightened. "Not anymore." Daniel stepped closer, desperation flickering in his eyes. "Mom, you don't understand. We've got nowhere to go. Skylar needs a place. Tanisha's hours got cut, and You always have nowhere to go, Daniel." Alma's voice cut sharp, sharper than she intended. She steadied herself, inhaled, and softened just a fraction. "But you had chances, more than I can count. Every loan, every cosign, every dollar I gave until there was nothing left." Tanisha's face darkened. "We're your family. You can't just shut the door on us." Alma turned slowly, her hand brushing the weathered doorframe. She remembered the grape juice staining her dress, the laughter that cut her like glass, the phone calls demanding money while they vacationed without her, the years of being invisible. She faced them again, her eyes clear. Family doesn't bleed you dry. Family doesn't humiliate you for sport. Family doesn't throw you away the moment you say no. Daniel's shoulders sagged. I thought you'd always be there. I was. Alma's throat tightened, but her voice didn't waver. I was there until it nearly killed me. Silence fell heavy in the driveway. A breeze rustled the dead leaves across the pavement. Tanisha crossed her arms, glaring. So what now? She spat. You gonna watch us sleep in our car while you sit in that house all alone? You think that makes you righteous? Alma held her gaze, unflinching. No, it makes me free. Daniel took a step forward, his hand half reaching. Mom, please. Alma lifted her palm. Stop. Her eyes softened, the way only a mother's could. I love you, Daniel. That will never change. But love doesn't mean I have to let you destroy me. This house is mine, my sanctuary. You can't come back here. The words hung in the air like a final verdict. Daniel's lips parted, but no sound came. He looked at Tanisha, who rolled her eyes, muttering curses under her breath as she stalked back to the car. Come on, she barked. But Daniel lingered. His eyes shimmered with something Alma hadn't seen in years. Regret. Maybe even respect. He nodded faintly, almost imperceptibly, then turned and followed his wife. The car door slammed. The Honda sputtered to life and disappeared down the street, its red tail lights swallowed by the night. Alma stood alone in the driveway, her chest rising and falling with the weight of what she'd done. She had closed the door, not just on Daniel's chaos, but on years of pain. For the first time, Alma didn't feel like someone's afterthought or financial crutch. She felt whole. She touched the folder to her heart, whispered into the night, Charles, I did it. The house creaked in the breeze like an old friend stirring awake. Alma smiled through her tears. She wasn't just the owner of a house. She was the owner of her life. The house was quiet that night, but Alma's heart was not. After Daniel and Tanisha's car had vanished down the street, she sat alone on the front steps, the folder clutched against her chest. The cool air stung her cheeks, carrying the scent of damp earth. She thought of Daniel as a little boy, the way he had clung to her skirt when thunder frightened him, the way his laughter had filled these very walls when Charles tossed him in the air. A mother's love never fully untangled itself, no matter how many years or wounds passed. Her eyes blurred with tears. Could I really shut him out? Could I turn away my own flesh and blood? But then the memory shifted. The first loan she'd co-signed, Daniel's promises to pay her back, the second, the third, the fourth, each one leaving her poorer and more broken. The calls at midnight demanding help, the way Tanisha had smirked at family dinners, dismissing her contributions, making her feel small, and Skylar, her granddaughter, throwing grape juice on her dress, repeating words that cut deeper than any stain. Mommy said you don't belong here. Alma pressed her hand to her chest. The ache was sharp, but underneath it burned something stronger. She stood, pacing the porch. The choice loomed heavy. Open the door and let the cycle begin again, or close it once and for all. If she let them back in, she knew what would happen. The house would fill with shouting, unpaid bills, broken promises. Her peace would be shattered, her hard-won freedom lost. If she kept the door shut, she would be alone. Yet in that silence, perhaps she would finally be free. Alma walked back inside, closing the door gently behind her. She pressed her forehead against the wood, whispering, "I love you, Daniel, but I can't save you any more." Her tears fell, but her resolve did not break. The choice had been made. For the first time in her 72 years, Alma chose herself. Weeks passed. Daniel did not return. Tanisha's bitter voice left no more messages. The silence was painful at first, like losing a limb, but slowly it became a balm. Alma poured herself into her house. She painted the walls a fresh white, scrubbed the wood floors until they gleamed, and filled the kitchen with the scent of fresh bread. The garden bloomed again under her hands, daffodils, tulips, and the lilies Charles had once admired. But most of all, Alma filled her life with people who valued her. Corinne, the librarian, began stopping by after work, bringing second-hand books and staying for tea. Mrs. Delgado from 2B helped her plant herbs by the porch. Mr. Ellis, a widower from church, brought his guitar on Sundays, filling the house with gentle music. They weren't blood, but they were family. One evening, Alma hosted them all in her newly restored dining room. Laughter rang through the air, mingling with the smell of roasted chicken and baked bread. She raised her glass, her eyes shining. "To new beginnings," she said. The room echoed back. "To Alma." Later that night, after everyone had gone, Alma stood alone in the quiet house. She touched the framed copy of her LLC papers on the wall, a symbol not just of ownership but of independence. She thought of Daniel wherever he was. Her heart ached, but it no longer broke. She had given him her love. She had given him her chance. Now she had given herself the last word. At 72, Alma was not broken. She was not a burden. She was free. And in the silence of her home, Alma whispered the truth that carried her into tomorrow. "The best word I ever learned was no."